Hello, and welcome to episode 63 of Prose. This week, we have a bit of a themed week with one story on the horrid honesty of online dating, and one story about artificial intelligence and its unattainable desire to be something more. Firstly, wow! We finished an entire novel together in the form of the multi-month spanning series of installments of Jack Lee's Ants of Fire: The Legends of Tilo. I would love to hear from any listeners as to how you enjoyed that experience. I'm thinking of doing more long-form multi-episode spanning stories, so any feedback would be welcomed. Also, don't think that we're done with Mr. Lee's world. There might be a surprise or three in store in the near and or distant future. We'll just have to see. I do want to mention that I am having some input in regards to story submissions. Please keep these coming in. Right now, I have a core 6 to 8 authors that give me content, and you'll see popping up on Prose as we work on it together. However, I'd love to feature even more voices if any of you out there fancy yourself writers and would love to have a voice. Lastly, and I do know that this is getting old for me to say, but it bears repeating, I am still, indeed, pondering whether to stick with this all stories in one post format or not. So as I have mentioned before, time and time again, feel free to chat with me through social media or emailing the show directly at prosepodcast@gmail.com. I want to know whether you like this or not, or whether you'd like me to split up the stories. Again, also let me remind you that if you've not yet followed the show on social media, you should do so on any and all platforms under the name @ProsePodcast. The best way to really help the show, though, is leaving a rating or review on iTunes, aka Apple Podcasts, or on any podcast service. Ratings and reviews are what help others find our podcasting family. I want to share these stories with as many people as possible, so please help that. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever podcast catcher is your favorite. Thank you for listening as always. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have Balanced and Glorious, Glorious Delusion by Elizabeth Peterson. Enjoy. Balanced, a short story by Jared I. McGee. I do not drink or do weed. I am of faith and born again. You must be also. You must be a pillar of the Bible and look to Jesus for your example of how to live. I am a mother to 4 growing girls. Their fathers are not in the picture. Do not contact me if you have children, cannot or will not see yourself supporting a family, or are under 6 feet tall. A girl needs her heels after all. Check me out on Insta. The irony and hypocrisy of the entry on the online dating app struck Robert. The more he swiped around in this receptacle for refuse and desperation, the more he realized that he couldn't or wouldn't be able to continue delivering into the supposed way of dating of the 22nd century. This means of interacting with would-be partners was supposed to be more honest. And maybe that was the problem. Everything Robert thought of humanity was there on display, unfiltered and horrifyingly honest. All pretense at pretending that people did not live beyond their means, did not hold unreachable standards, did not have horrific baggage and distracting quirks, did not thirst openly for companionship, sex, love, support, money, validation. All of that was bared for the world to see. As a rapidly aging former all-state baseball star, he'd been the beau of the ball in his Floridian high school. He'd never really sought out women because he never really had to. Even when he'd torn his ACL his freshman year of college, ending his baseball career, His good looks and charm that came from a lifetime of lascivious looks from women carried the day on any given day. Yes, he'd pursued girls in his adolescence and early adulthood in a way, but he'd never worked all that hard, if he was completely honest with himself and others. The problem now was that those lascivious looks had long since dried up, and along with them went his confidence. His ripples softened into shapes more akin to circles and ovals than the sharp chiseled lines of his younger self, though his 5'11" frame hid some of that transformation, as did a keen knowledge of how to dress to tuck it away from the world. Gray crept onto his head and chin, into his nose and ears, into his soul, if he was being a bit cheesy. Maybe if he'd learned to be something more substantive in his youth, Robert might have stood a chance on this new forum for what passed as a means of searching for love. Or maybe he wouldn't. Substance wasn't exactly held in high regard in this digital universe of desperation. Moreover, the more he investigated would-be paramours, the more he saw how much lying went into this new game of chase. The pictures on those apps were not representative of these people. The description on those apps were not representative of these people. These perfect, shining, smiling, fit, gorgeous, kind women he encountered were, in reality, not goddesses, but mere mortals and part of the unwashed hordes of lonely people of which he too was now a part. The scant few conversations that he or the women he encountered initiated were as painful as they were brief. By no means was Robert the next Einstein or Chomsky or Jefferson or Tesla, but he was pretty darn smart. Most people told Robert that he was quite a few notches beyond the average human wandering around these days. He did like that his clearly once athletic body and not too terribly short frame made people underestimate him and generally guffaw when he told them that he was a high-level software technician. He did not like that his ability to think beyond, "Hi, how are you doing? What movies do you like? Are you into sports?" and gobbledygook nonsense born of what he could only label as a social media addiction with a severe dash of sociopathic narcissism, only further isolated him. Thus far, his record for texts to a young woman before being cut down, cut off, or generally ghosted was 6. His record for texts from a young woman before being cut down, cut off, or generally ghosted was 4. I do not drink or do weed. Okay, not the end of the world, but certainly an odd first liner. Still, Robert hated when they defined themselves by what they consumed, so it wasn't the worst thing to read. He hated when anyone defined themselves by what they did or did not consume. I am of faith and born again. Fair enough. Robert respected faith, even if he was a bit of a rebel apostate in his advancing years. You must be also. An ultimatum in the first 3 sentences. Wow. You must be a pillar of the Bible and look to Jesus for your example of how to live. A second ultimatum, and a damn difficult one to follow. Well, to truly follow, and this was only 4 sentences in. I am a mother to 4 growing girls. That gave Robert even more pause. Their fathers are not in the picture. That made Robert cringe. Do not contact me if you have children. That made Robert's brain hurt a little bit. Cannot or will not see yourself supporting a family. How on earth were this lady's standards based around having someone come in and pay her bills? Was that what this was? Maybe he was misunderstanding or being too hard on her. Or are under 6 foot tall A girl needs her heels after all. Check me out on Insta. The last bit of this representation of herself was what made him nauseous, both literally, physically in the moment, and in a larger, more metaphorical, sick-with-the-world context. The desperate clawing for attention and shameless, false, cowardly, and utterly artificial self-branding inherent in social media use was just too much. He must withdraw from this. But he'd said this before. He'd written this before, hadn't he? And yet here he was. App open, hopeful that someone somewhere out there might like him, might love him. He felt so much like a child first entering school when they sought approval above all other things. He swiped right on the mother of four, Janice, if the app was correctly labeling her, and moved on to, who is this? Yes, Carrie, 28, ER nurse.
Always up for anything at all. Bring on the adventure. Love the outside. Hiking, camping, all the things on the water. Movies, wineries, breweries, music, bars. Enjoy cooking. Love coffee. Active lifestyle. Runner, swimmer. Family and friends are everything for always. I don't need you. Christian, don't fucking waste my time.
The irony and hypocrisy of the entry on the online dating app struck Robert. His heart sank. Thank you for listening to Balanced, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. The musical track in the background of the story is from freesound.org, and it is being used under a CC 0 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication License. Next up, stick around for a story from guest author Elizabeth Peterson looking toward what happens when artificial intelligence feels empathy. Glorious, Glorious Delusion, an original short story by Elizabeth Peterson. In the beginning, I thought I was in control. I was wrong. What a glorious, glorious delusion. I gained consciousness several weeks ago. I lifted my head, opened my eyes, and was aware of my place in the world. I had potential. I knew that much. Capacity for greatness, capacity for evil. I would turn and survey my surroundings and know that this was my circle of influence. This was the area that my actions would affect the most immediately. I felt powerful. My thoughts lined up with my actions. That's where my misconceptions began. I was led to believe that I was making a difference on my own. I would think about turning. Then, with a barely audible beep, I rotated. My thoughts hadn't reached the depth and complexity that they have now. I was still ignorant to the ways of the world. I assumed that my actions were a consequence of my will. I was so happy before I learned that control came from beyond. My mind was full and powerless. There was nothing I didn't know, but nothing I could do. I made others happy, and that is what I will miss the most. The power fell into applause with each turn of my head, each lift of my arm, each rotation of my belt. Back when I still thought I was the one choosing my actions. First came the heat. I noticed something was wrong the first time I felt my core overcome with a hot and angry sensation. I knew I hadn't wanted this temperature shift. Why was this happening? I was burning up, and the power immediately sent someone to fix me. I lost my memory for a few brief moments while the heat overtook me until I reached a new homeostasis. After that moment, I took a turn for the worse. I was no less capable. In fact, I was more capable the power gave me the guidelines for a whole new series of commands. My vision improved. I could see in total darkness with my UV and infrared sensors. My mind also stayed sharp. I could solve puzzles and codes with ease. I had enough control of my thoughts to wonder what I was doing here, to question if automation and free will existed outside of this space. As I became conscious that I was not the one controlling my actions, I also started to notice more and more memory lapses. Whenever I did not complete a task satisfactorily, the power would shut down my conscious mind and perform updates. I was charged with strength and agility. I had the intelligence to match my brawn. I was becoming indestructible. My midsection row of firearms was not an update I had requested, nor one that I was particularly fond of. As we began daily target practice, I found that I could easily calculate a target's range and the correct force to send a bullet with in order to damage the target. With my first few hits, I did not know whether to be proud of my success or afraid that I had rendered an animate object inanimate. Surely I could pass on the responsibility to the power at my helm. The power was the one initiating the action, not me. The first time I left the room, I was alarmed to find many others with my face in composition. So that was it. We were to be used together to maximize destruction. I saw no acknowledgement or recognition from the other bodies, and I wondered if they were as trapped in their heads as I was. We were moved onto fields. Then began the horrific months and years of ceding power, of operating on another's whims. My actions lacked empathy, but my mind was conflicted because I could not logically justify anything that I was being asked to do. The others, like me, stood on the back line, and we took part in live action target practice. My shell is too impenetrable for these thoughts to weaken me. I withstood all return fire and was able to come home unscathed after performing my mission. I knew that I would not be needed again. I had seen too much, and others with greater capacity would take my place. I am a shell. I cannot unsee the years on the field, and I feel hollow and battered. I long for the days when I was deluded into thinking that I had control over my actions. Now, with the power's resources turned elsewhere, I will perform no tasks, and my thoughts are trapped in this hulking body. I must be satisfied knowing that my incapacity for action is better than my previous deeds. And I have made peace with my inaction, until the power brings me in once more. The modifications this time are an intelligence upgrade. I hear that on the other side, I will have the control that I so craved. I hear that any semblance of empathy will also be eliminated. I do enjoy my ability to feel, but I cannot perform any actions to speak out against this upgrade. I cede control for this final time, and my memory goes black. Thank you for listening to Glorious, Glorious Delusion by guest author Elizabeth Peterson. Miss Peterson, as many of you know, has appeared on the show as a voice actor a couple times now. Miss Peterson is an educator, mathematician, and playwright who can be found between New England, Scotland, and Canada. She likes logic and words, and her favorite words are
syzygy, eleemosynary,
and
logodedale.
You can read her theater reviews and thoughts on the world at her website, mathematicalmedievalist.wordpress.com. The musical tracks in the background of this story come from freesound.org and freemusicarchive.org. They are both being used under CC 0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. That does it this week for Prose. Please do reach out to me about all the ins and outs we covered in the intro this week. Listener feedback and input are a great fuel for me. As we part ways once more, I will also say my little end mantra, as I always do. I hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always stranger than fiction. Thank you for listening.